I realized that most of my clients, regardless of what their problems were, what their issues were, what they were seeking help for, most of their issues were somewhere related to relationships. Either they didn't have enough friends, or they were toxic with their partner, or their partner was toxic with them. They were in some sort of a toxic relationship with their partner. Their kids wouldn't listen. They were alone and lonely, or they, had crappy coworkers or whatever. They just, it's a lot of their problems. Even the addicts that I know or have known, their biggest issue was the people that they knew in their life. It wasn't the booze or the drugs; it was the people that they knew. They just were people who didn't support them in the ways that they needed support.
What's up, you beautiful beasts? I'm Katie. I'm on a mission to help humans become the best possible versions of themselves and to strive for overall health, mental health, emotional health, physical health, all of the healths, without ever having to step on a scale. I have had the privilege to talk to all kinds of different humans who've been through a plethora of experiences just being a human and existing. I believe that every single time somebody shares their story, at least one person listening will learn from it, be inspired by it, and maybe, just maybe, even change the entire direction of their life. These are the stories of humans unveiling their beautiful beast. Keep listening. This is the Unveiling the Beast podcast. So this is really cool because I love interviewing other coaches. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about what you have to say because, I'm in the health circle or space, and health is much more than what we eat and how much we move. And one of the things that I think is super important to our health is relationships.
Yes.
And so I hear that you're kind of an expert.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd call myself an expert, but that's what I do. That is where my focus is at. Correct.
Nice.
On relationships, specifically on boundaries and how to build relationships using boundaries. But yes, relationships, and not just romantic relationships either, but all styles of relationships, whether it's family or coworkers or friends or whatever style of relationship you might be talking about. Yes,
and I should specify that's also what I meant.
Yeah. I like to clarify that because a lot of people that I talk to when I mention relationships, when a lot of people hear relationships, they automatically default to romantic relationships.
Right. Yeah.
So I wanted to clarify that.
So how did you get into the relationship space?
That's a good question because I was lonely for most of my life. I grew up with virtually no friends. And when I say that, I want to clarify also that I mean for most of my school years, I had no one to play with. Not my siblings, not my classmates or schoolmates. I had no one, literally zero people to play with. I ended up playing most of my time alone. There was a few years, 2, 3, 4 years, somewhere in there, where each year I would have a friend for that year. So there was a few different people that I did hang out with for about a year at a time, but never more than one at a time. So if they were busy or occupied or off on holidays or something, I had no one to play with still. But for most of my years, I was alone. And then that improved a little when I became an adult, when I grew up. I had a few people that I could hang out with some of the time, but I still spent the vast majority of my time alone because I couldn't find people that I related to or who related to me. And what I learned as a child is my authentic and natural self is not welcome anywhere. Not at school, not around friends, not in the playground, nowhere, not even at home. So I wasn't, able to be myself. The only place I was able to be myself is playing off by myself. And because I was disliked by my peers in almost all situations, I was not welcome to play where other kids were playing. And that translated as an adult into wanting to do what other people were doing, wanting to go places other people were going, out to the bar, to the game, to concerts, whatever, and not being welcomed in any of those places.
Mm.
Not being invited, not being asked, not even if I chose to go, nobody would go with me. Um, so I learned early on that if I'm going to learn how to, if I'm going to have any people in my life, significant friendships or anything like that, never mind a romantic relationship, I'm going to have to figure out how to do this whole, relationship thing, how to figure out what social skills are, because I didn't come by them naturally as most people do. Most people do have some basic social skills and that they learn when they're a child, and then they expand on those, mostly by accident, sometimes on purpose. I had to do all of it clinically and scientifically.
Mm.
I had to analyze and test and try and fail most of the time, like 99% of the time, not get any results. So how I got into the relationship space, like that, I eventually, by clinically and scientifically figuring out how to create relationships. Eventually, I got married, had children. We were together 20 years. When my kids were old enough, were just about to become adults, she left. She was basically waiting for that to happen so that she could leave.
Mm.
Um, and then I was without relationships again. I was without, I had one friend, um, and we didn't hang out that often because he also had relationships of his own most of the time. So he wasn't available to me most of the time. Um, and that's it. And then over time, I started to realize where my mistakes were. Going back to that scientific and clinical methods, I figured out what I could do to have better chances in relationships. And throughout the course of the past 8 years since my ex left, I have come up with a system for building relationships. And when I became a coach just about 5 years ago now, um, I realized that most of my clients, regardless of what their problems were, what their issues were, what they were seeking help for, most of their issues were somewhere related to relationships. Either they didn't have enough friends, or they were toxic with their partner, or their partner was toxic with them. They were in some sort of a toxic relationship with their partner. Their kids wouldn't listen. They were alone and lonely, or they, had crappy coworkers or whatever. They just, it's a lot of their problems. Even the addicts that I know or have known, their biggest issue was the people that they knew in their life. It wasn't the booze or the drugs; it was the people that they knew. They just were people who didn't support them in the ways that they needed support. So through the past, few years of coaching, I have adapted and modified and evolved this system that I call unconditional boundaries, for how to build relationships using boundaries,
Mm.
as opposed to how to protect ourselves from toxic ones. Because what I found early on in my adult life is, if I protected myself from toxic relationships, I had no relationships. And I decided in my early adult years that I'd rather have toxic relationships than none,
Mm.
because I had grown up with none. So toxic was better than none.
Mm.
So then I just had to figure out how to manage. So and of course, what's the advice we're given when we find ourselves in toxic relationships? Well, you need boundaries, right? And great, except boundaries push people away. I mean, granted, they're designed to push the toxic, negative, hurtful people away. They're designed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But when the only people in my life are toxic, hurtful people, then they push everybody away.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that. So that's what got me into this space. I wanted a better way to still keep myself safe from those toxic people, but also build relationships with less toxic and healthy people. And I use healthy in quotes because nobody's actually good. Like everybody's got their shit going on. Everybody's
Yeah.
got their stuff, right? We're all traumatized. We're all hurt. We all have our background. We all have our story. So nobody is like perfectly healthy, at least emotionally, mentally, physically. None of us are that good. We all need some help somewhere. So I wanted to learn how to build relationships with people who were not that perfect, healthy person. And unconditional boundaries gave me a system to do that.
That's awesome. I wanted to quickly acknowledge you first for just bringing into my awareness that never clicked before that basically everything that we coach people on goes back to a relationship. And for the listeners, like what we do as coaches, usually we take people back or we take people inside themselves to figure out where these beliefs are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually all about programming.
Mm-hmm.
And programming comes from messages, and messages comes from people, and people are the people that we are in relationships with. So that's a
Yes.
big one.
Yeah.
And then I also had a question about um, going back to your past when you said, um, you didn't have relationships. Were you aware that you didn't have relationships and that you were alone, or was it an awareness of loneliness? Because aloneness and loneliness are two different things.
Mm. That's interesting because yeah, I was aware that of both actually, I would say. Because depending on my mood and my um my mood, my frame of mind, where I was at emotionally on any given day, I might feel just lonely, rejected, and depressed,
Mm-hmm.
or I might understand that really just I don't have someone to play with, or I don't have someone to hang out with, or share my thoughts with, or my feelings with. Um, and on those on those days when I was a little more emotionally stable, I would just go off and play by myself. I I'd kind of wish that I could share those experiences with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't always need to. On those days when I was feeling more vulnerable, that's when I felt the loneliness. That's when I felt, the need to have somebody in my life.
Yeah.
But for me, I had early on, I had a knowledge of God in the Christian way. From about 5, 6 years old, I had a relationship with Him. Not because my parents taught it to me, not because I went to church, not because we as a family went to church or had any exposure that way. I mean, I did have some exposure to God because we had gone for, Christmas or Easter, or we had gone to a wedding, or we'd gone to some friend's event or something like that at a church on occasion. But my parents were not church going people. But I'd been enough times, a couple, 3 times, enough times that by the time I was 5, 6 years old, I knew what God was, who He was, and that I could have a relationship with Him. And because I was so alone so often, He was my friend. He took the place of my imaginary friend. I never did have an
Mm-hmm.
imaginary friend instead of I had God. So that that relationship gave me the ability to not feel lonely all the time. I mean, I'm a child. I still did feel lonely a lot,
Right. Yeah.
but I had that relationship with God that I didn't feel it all the time. I could sometimes just go and feel by myself and feel alone and be kind of okay with that. There's all kinds of wonderful things you can do in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the nature in cities, even the corrupted nature you'll find in towns and cities. There's still all kinds of interesting things to do. I mean, I was a master at the gutter river, the helping the water drain down the gutters of the roads and
Mm.
into the water drain. I became a master at that because that's one of those city type nature things, right? Um, and to this day, I like to make sure the water gets to flow where it wants to flow.
Yeah.
Right? I love doing that. Lots of us do.
Yeah. That's really cool. I like that.
So,
So then fast forward, you've come up with this system now
mhm.
to, would you say it's to help people like you or people that grew up like you?
Mhm. So in a basic sense, yes, it's helped people who were like me, who struggled building relationships, who struggled finding, or who have or still do struggle finding good people, people that they resonate with,
Mhm.
people that we can build relationships with, um, as opposed to people who are in toxic relationships and trying to escape. I can help and do help with those also, and have. I've had clients that do that as a coach, or that need that as a coach. I've done that. My focus, though, is on helping people build positive, healthy relationships. Um, so the people who are going to be most often kind of in that, in my niche, you might call it. Some people call it a niche.
Mhm.
The people who are really looking to they are really looking to find better relationships. That's a different mental space than somebody who's looking to get out of a toxic relationship, because somebody who's looking to get out of a toxic relationship is usually just done on people.
Yeah.
They're done on men, maybe they're done on women, maybe they're done on all people, but they're just done. They're just looking to escape.
Yeah.
They're not looking to build something. Sometimes, oftentimes, not all the time, but sometimes people who escape toxic relationships, once they've escaped and done a little work on themselves, sometimes they do want to have healthy relationships at that point. So that's when they might come to someone like me. And like I said, I can help them with that other part too. I'm in a toxic relationship. What do I do? I've even helped one person improve their toxic relationship so they didn't have to leave.
Hmm.
Um, so that is a possibility. Although I don't want to advertise that, because just like the diet commercials, results may vary. You're not going to go from 350 pounds down to 120 in 6 months. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Most 99% of toxic relationships you cannot make better. You're
Yeah.
not. It's not possible. And if you think you're the outlier, you're probably part of the problem.
Yeah. The little
Uh,
asterisk, results not typical.
correct.
Yeah.
I have helped one person do that, but that's because her partner was also trying to get out of or trying to stop having a toxic relationship, and
Mm,
that isn't typical for most toxic relationships.
right.
Um, right now might be a good time to identify what I mean by toxic relationship, because there is several kinds. The typical kind is there one partner is abusive and one partner is being abused. And in those cases, I won't say I won't promise that you can't both heal in that relationship, but it's virtually impossible. In order for one or both to heal, you need to do so separately. Um, First of all, the abuser isn't likely to even want to heal if they're getting mostly what they want. Why would they want to? Why would the tyrant choose to be a positive growing leader when he's getting what he wants?
Mm-hmm.
Right? He might, maybe he understands he's hurting the people, but if he had a problem with that, he wouldn't have been a tyrant in the first place. Right? So it's very unlikely that those kinds of abusers are going to heal. And I use he in that term because generally speaking, it's more often the man. But that is very much a generalization, because there are plenty of women who are abusive.
Yes.
I've got clients who are in relationships with abusive women.
Mm.
So although generally speaking it's more often the man, it can also be the woman too. And in many cases it's both. This is the thing that a lot of people don't understand about abusive relationships. It's often both. We often abuse each other. Um, Not all the time. I'm not going to blanket statement that it's always both of you, that it's your fault
Right.
too, but often it is. Often there is some some aspect where, someone's hurting me, but I'm hurting them too in a different way and for different reasons, but I'm hurting them too.
Yeah.
Um, the other toxic relationships and the ones that I tend to focus on are the ones that are mostly good people with opposing values. An example I've given before is someone who likes freedom in a relationship with someone who likes safety. The freedom person is going to want to travel across the country and go skydiving and deep sea diving and race car driving and all those wonderful things. All the things that scare the crap out of the safety person.
Mm-hmm.
The safety person wants to be safe, wants to do things that they know, that they can predict, that they can understand the outcome, that they can reasonably feel safe. And it's fine if two people want to do these things and be friends, as long as they don't want to do any of them together. A toxic relationship is two people who have opposing values who want one or both of them wants to do those things together. If I want to go skydiving and my partner is a safety person and they don't want to go skydiving, but I insist they come with me, now that becomes toxic. Right? So that's the toxic relationships that I tend to focus on, because it's not about an abusive relationship. It's more about differing values.
Mm.
The difficult part is if you're in a toxic relationship is you can almost never tell the difference, because your emotions are the same. You're feeling when I want to go skydiving and my safety partner doesn't, he or she might feel like I'm demanding, controlling, and abusive. Right?
Yeah.
That's often the case. When the reality is, I just want something different than she wants. So that's one of the things that I can do. And that relationship that I did help, that was the case. She couldn't see it. She felt like he was being a narcissistic abuser. But that was the case. Of course, there is other relationships where I also helped them to separate, where he was or she was just an abuser, and I just had to help them escape. But the one where I helped them have a positive relationship, it was simply because they had differing values. And that's where unconditional boundaries come in. What I do in unconditional boundaries is help people find the values that resonate and build the relationship on those. And those were values that are opposing, leave them the hell out of the relationship. Don't go skydiving with your partner. Find a buddy or someone else to go with.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Let your partner stay at home and do whatever they do at home. Or let your partner go have lunch with their friend. Do what makes them feel good. Right? Those things, those values that are opposing, leave them out of the relationship. I think I've said this to you in a past conversation. Another example I use in that case is two people. They like to eat together. One likes to go out to the restaurant and fancy dinners and likes to date and go places. And the other likes home cooked meals. What's the one thing they shouldn't do together? They shouldn't eat together.
Yeah.
Right? Don't eat together. Right? Now, that might be difficult if you're married to this person. Not impossible, because eating isn't the focus point of a relationship.
Right.
But it is
some relationships.
It is.
But yeah.
And that's what I'm getting at. If your values around that are similar, great, then do that. If they're not, leave that particular thing out of the relationship. Right? So that's kind of the concept. There's a lot more detail to it, but that's kind of the idea: is build your relationship around those values you have in common, not the things you do that are in common, but the values you have in common.
Yeah.
Right?
So are there like steps in your program, or Could you give a little more details about like what it takes, how to do this?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great question. There are there are in unconditional boundaries, and I call them unconditional boundaries. A lot of people bristle at that word because at the word unconditional, because unconditional and boundaries seem like opposites. You mean I have to love them unconditionally and have boundaries? How do you do that? And well, there's some truth to that. I mean, the word unconditional is meant more for this works for everyone in any situation, in any relationship, in any style of relationship. There's no conditions as to which relationships this works for and which ones it doesn't. And if you do this perfectly, which nobody can, it can lead to unconditional love. Um, but you do need boundaries. We need a set of guardrails and guidelines on how to do that. And in unconditional boundaries, I have three types of boundaries. There is bridges, which we use to connect with other people.
Mm-hmm.
There are beacons, which we use to shine a light on the values in the relationship, mine or yours. And then there are barriers, which we use to separate ourselves from the other person, our values from theirs, whatever. So bridges, beacons, and barriers. One to build, one to maintain, and one to separate. So just to clarify for those people who are like, well, it sounds like you're trying to teach we should be in relationships with everybody. That's what barriers are for. Barriers will remind us of what we've traditionally been taught about boundaries. The barriers are what help us separate from those toxic people,
Mm.
from those people whose values are directly opposing to our own. I use two kinds of descriptions to talk about the values we should have barriers around. There is the competitive values like freedom and safety, where they're directly opposing to each other. They compete with each other. They are not compatible. They don't work
Mm-hmm.
well together. And then there are the subversive values, the values where one is attempting to subvert the other, one is attempting to undermine and harm the other. An example of this might be a controlling value. I want to control this aspect of my life. I want to control how much time you and attention you give me. I want to control what I eat. I want to control where I go and who I spend my time with. If I want to control that, and my partner wants to try new things and play with stuff, and just let's just give it a taste. Let's just meet this person. Let's just go this place, do this thing. Those are subversive values. One is trying to undermine the other.
Mm.
So competitive and subversive values, they need barriers. This is what typical boundaries, what most people in the boundary space, in the relationship space that talk about boundaries, this is what they're talking about. Stay away from those people who will harm you. Um, the advanced version of that is sometimes you can be in relationships with people who will harm you. Just don't do the harmful things, right? If the subversive value is I want to control the people that I hang out with, and you want to meet new people all the time, then what we don't do together is meet people, right? We just leave that out of our relationship.
Yeah.
We can snuggle and watch movies. We can do all kinds of other wonderful things. Just don't go meet people, right? But that's the advanced value. Most of the time, I would say stay away from people who have competitive and subversive values with yours, that our values are so opposing to yours as to be harmful. So now that I've covered that unconditional boundaries do still contain what traditional boundaries teach, let me get into the difference. I created unconditional boundaries to help people build, create, design, and maintain positive, healthy relationships. Because when I was taught boundaries, as I mentioned before, all it did was push people away. Sure, it pushed bad people away, harmful people away, people who were hurting me, but it pushed everybody away.
Yeah.
Nobody taught me in the relationship space how to build relationships. They only taught me how to stay away from bad ones. Great. That doesn't do anything to help me build good ones. So I built unconditional boundaries to do that. Starting with bridges. Bridges are the invitations we send out to other people by being vulnerable with our values. And I don't mean your deepest, darkest secrets. I don't mean share your deepest, darkest secrets with the people in the line at the grocery store.
Right.
I mean, that's not great. But you, right? It
Sorry,
sounds
I got this visual and this like whole scenario flashed into my head when you said that.
right, because that's what a lot of people think when they hear you need to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people's fears go to is I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to share my dark secrets with strangers. Don't. But in the line at the grocery store, you might share that you like hockey or that you prefer to sew or, something reasonably shallow.
Yeah.
That's a bridge. You say you're sharing with somebody, you're vulnerable with somebody, you're sharing something that's important to you. It doesn't have to be core important, but it's important to you. And you send out bridges. Bridges are an invitation into my life. They're an invitation into my values. I'm vulnerably sharing something I like in the hopes that you like it too. So the perfect scenario here is one of two things. Either they have that same value, so they accept the invitation. Oh, I also like sewing. What do you like about it? Or they don't like that value. Oh, I'm not really sure what you're talking about. I've never had an interest in sewing. Um, sorry. And friendship ends, right? You don't build anything because there's nothing there to build on.
Right.
And when you're in line with somebody at the grocery store, that's not a rejection. That's just conversation, right? So great. That's invitations. You send out invitations, and then in the hopes that people connect with those things those values that are similar. You might say, I prefer flat out honesty, and then the other person says, well, you're fat and ugly, and you like them for that. That's right. That's a connection.
Yeah.
Um, that's not typically how it works, but that's one of those values. I prefer a little bit of shallow conversations before we get going. Well, if the other person finds shallow conversations boring, then they just won't engage. Great.
Right.
Let's not start a friendship that could turn out bad. So those are invitations. Those are bridges. Bridges are a little bit like invitations. They're also offers. I'm offering to connect with you on this topic, on this value, on this purpose. I think of invitations as a request, as a gentle nudge. Here's the thing I like. Here's the value that I hold close. Here's something I'd like to connect with you on. Oftentimes, we'll send out bridges to people we think have a similar value. We don't just send out bridges to somebody in the line at the grocery store. We're, out at a social event and we find somebody else who seems to be reacting to things in a similar way to the way I am. So I walk up to them and I connect. Well, it seems like you like this. This is what I like. What do you think? It seems like you don't like parties. I don't either. What do you think? Let's go have a chat. Right? You're not jumping to let's go make love most of the
Right.
time, but you are, let's go chat, let's go talk, let's, get away from the party and go have a coffee someplace. Right? So those are bridges. And as people accept our bridges and we build relationships on those, we can start sharing deeper and deeper values. We can start sharing things that are closer and closer to our heart. And the more they accept those invitations, the closer we get with them. And many times we'll get to a certain point and they won't accept the deeper value.
Mm.
That isn't a rejection, that's just a limit to how deep the friendship is, how deep the relationship is, how close you are to that coworker, how much you want to hang out with that cousin, right? Whatever the case may be, it's not a rejection. It's simply, oh, we don't go that deep. Okay. We're not BFFs, we're just friends. Right. So when you get to some of those deeper values that they don't share, that doesn't mean you stop sharing the more shallow ones. It just means that you don't have one of them really deep, close friendships. This is where a lot of us mess up, is we're like, and we keep sending out invitation after invitation after invitation, and then as soon as they say no to one of them, the whole friendship's over. We're looking for that one closest, best buddy, and we're not willing to accept anything else. That's where a lot of us get stuck. Is as soon as we find something we don't relate about, we're like, oh, the friendship's over. It's not. It just means you've hit the limit of where that friendship can go. You still have all these other things in common, all these other values in common. Even if there's only one or two of them, you can still do those things, share those things, talk about those things. There's nothing wrong with that. And as a matter of fact, I would argue that we need several of those.
Yeah.
We need people that when my best friend is pissing me off, I got somebody that I don't care that much about, that if I piss them off, who cares? Right? I care about them a little bit, but let's go to a concert together. I don't really care what your life is about. Let's not talk about that. Let's just enjoy the band. Right?
Yeah.
I've had several friends like that. And that's actually what helped me to master this concept. Is eventually I started making just shallow friendships. I wanted them to become closer, and I still felt lonely when I wanted them deep, deep connections, but I felt lonely a lot less often because I had several of those casual friends. And that fed most of my social need. Not all of it, but enough that I wasn't nearly as lonely. So bridges connect. Bridges are the things we send out to others, the vulnerable values we share to invite and offer connection with others. Next, we come to beacons. Beacons are the lights we shine on our values or the values that the other person says they have to compare those to our actions and our thoughts to see if they're true. So I might send out a beacon when I profess to love adventure, but I've been sitting at home for a month playing video games. Right? I might shine a beacon and say, do you actually love adventure, or do you just wish you loved adventure? Is it something about adventure that makes you want it, but you don't actually like it? What's the truth here? So a beacon is designed to shine on your values to see if it's actually real, or if there's something deeper going on. This is the reason, and this was actually the last boundary, and I only just brought this in a few months ago because it's a more difficult one to do on our own. It often needs an outside perspective to shine that light on us. In coaching, we call that the mirror.
Mirror work.
Right?
Love it.
Exactly. Yeah. The mirror is something being reflected back at you that represents a judgment, a thought, a belief that you may not know you have. That's what a beacon does. Now, we can use beacons in a toxic way. This is another reason why it was difficult to come up with originally, because a lot of people get into relationships And then they just run around with their flashlight, shining their flashlight on everything the other
Yes.
person does that doesn't resonate with their values. Nobody wants to be challenged that way. Some of us who do the work, we learn to accept it and maybe even like it, but nobody enjoys it.
Yeah.
Nobody goes seeking it because this is fun. So if you get into a relationship with your flashlight on full force and just shining your light on their values, be prepared because it won't always go well. And at the same time, where I find beacons most valuable is when you have built a relationship with somebody, you have sent out a few bridges and you have connected in a few ways, and there are some values that you share. And that at some point, somebody starts acting, you or the other person starts acting differently than those values. Maybe we both do like adventure. Maybe we both do like excitement. Maybe we do both like freedom. And then I go jump in a race car, and you're like, no, 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 I don't want that. Then we can shine a beacon and say, well, you said you liked adventure and freedom and excitement. Is this that, or is there something else going on here?
Mm.
Is it that you actually don't like these things? Or is it something just about race cars specifically that is the problem? Like the beacon is
Yeah.
there to find what the value really is. Are you actually in alignment with your value, or is there something else? And if there's something else, are you willing to look at that? The problem with the person with the big bright flashlight is they don't care if the other person is willing to look at their values. A beacon in the unconditional boundaries context is a loving gesture designed to help the other person do something I believe they want to do. If they profess these values and they want to stay in alignment with those values, that I can help them see when they are or when they aren't, if they'd like me to. That isn't permission for me just to call them on their shit all the time.
Right.
There is no relationship that works out well where one or the other is calling everybody on their shit. If you feel the need to do that, you're not in a relationship, you're being bossy.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say we shouldn't sometimes, on occasion. There are times when that has to happen. But if you find that being the majority or even a significant amount of your time and energy spent on that, spent on calling somebody on their stuff, it's time to reconsider that relationship. At least the values that you think you share, because
Yeah.
maybe you don't.
So then the
So
beacon would be more like sorry to interrupt, more
yep,
like a gentle fashion,
yes,
like gentle, loving. I'm asking you
yes,
because I love you, friend.
yes.
Yeah, got it.
I'm asking you because I love you. I'm asking you because you have said this is a value
Mm-hmm.
and I'm confused. You've said this is a value and I don't see that. Can you help me understand better? I really want to share this with you.
Yeah.
And if we can't, that's okay. If this isn't your value, that's okay. We'll do something different.
Yeah.
If you don't actually like adventure and excitement, then maybe we'll do something. Maybe we'll just jump on a horse and go horseback riding. That we don't have to race,
Yeah.
right? We can do something kind and romantic. We don't have to do the dangerous thing, right? I still might go car racing, but you don't have to come with me,
Yeah.
right?
That's an easier
So
way to receive it for
yes,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, and that's the idea. Is it's meant to be. We don't have to share this. And if you'd like to, here's what I've noticed. And like I said, this is much better done inside of a coaching relationship. Sometimes they do it in therapy as well. But it's much more difficult to do in with your partner in a romantic relationship.
Mm.
The closer you are, the more difficult it becomes, the more dangerous it becomes. Relationships, especially unconditional relationships, were not designed to hold each other to account. It's not what relationships are for, especially romantic ones. Coaching relationships, yes. Employment relationships, for sure, hold each other to account.
Mm-hmm.
But romantic relationships, they're there to help us feel the mushy feelings, to feel warm and fuzzy, to feel safe in a world that isn't safe, right? That's what romantic relationships are for. And anytime we make them feel something other than that, we're harming the relationship. So yeah, that's bridges, beacons, and barriers. Build, maintain, and separate. Right? When a relationship gets to a point where one or both of you feels this is hurting me, it's time to think about barriers.
Yeah.
You put barriers in to limit the contact with that person around that topic. We will not talk about this. We will not do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is what divorced parents often have to do. They can't completely separate the relationship because they have children together,
Yeah.
right? So they have to put barriers in place to limit what contact they can have and how to have it, right? But there might still be bridges. There might still be some ways they can connect. And in the most optimum of co-parenting situations, there will be a few ways that they can connect. Just, those romantic things that they might have done together before are not those ways anymore. Now it's just, what do we do with our kids? And maybe we, share time with them or something like that. But whatever, like whatever your co-parenting situation looks like, there might be bridges there too.
Yeah.
So that's the key with these boundaries, is that you might use a combination of all three of them in different relationships, right? You might build more. You might send up bridges to try and deepen the relationship. Meanwhile, you might use the odd beacon or two to make sure the relationship is what you think it is. And when it's not, you might use a barrier to remove those things from the relationship that aren't in common. The key here is that the only boundary that can bring a relationship closer together is bridges. Beacons don't bring them closer together. And barriers definitely cannot bring them closer together. What we've been teaching as a society, our boundaries, don't have the capacity to bring people closer together. It's not their design. Their design is to help protect us from negative situations. They're not designed to help us come closer together. If we use those, there are other ways. If you ask other relationship experts, they'll say, yes, you use boundaries to keep the bad shit away. But here's the ways you bring your relationship closer together, and they're not boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I included a different version of boundaries in all the scenarios so that you could create them, deepen them, maintain them, and then reduce them and separate them if you need to.
I love that because typically we think of boundaries as like, or at least I can speak for myself. I think of boundaries as putting up these walls, putting my foot down and saying, this is how it has to be. I won't accept anything else. And
Correct.
so when we put it that way, it's almost negative, you know?
Yes.
So
That
I like
that
this
can't build
idea.
relationships.
Yeah. I like that the bridges and the beacons are added as a part of the boundaries.
Yes.
So I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
When was the last time you put your foot down and felt closer to that person?
exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
When was the last time you said, I won't tolerate this, and you felt more loved? Right? It's not how it works.
yeah,
Right? So we do need those. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't have those. We do need those. We do need to put our foot down sometimes. We do need
yeah.
to not tolerate things sometimes. But when that's our only option, we can't build relationships on that. So we need additional options. So that's where the unconditional boundaries comes into to help us give those other options.
I love
That's
it.
my thoughts. Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think this will be super helpful. My whole thing is if we can help just one person from each episode, mission accomplished. So,
Beautiful.
I do have one more question for you, and I ask everyone at the end of every episode, and I didn't prepare you for this. If you had one piece of advice that you could give to the world, what would it be?
That's easy. Decide if you're trying to build a relationship or protect yourself from one.
Boom. Ladies and gentlemen, Andy Lidstone signing off. Until next time.